We all do one thing every single day that determines how our day will unfold. It's the difference between a happy day, a miserable day, a productive day, or a lazy one. It largely comes down to how we think. And for the last year, I've been doing one exercise that helps me work on exactly that. You've probably heard the saying, listening is the most important part of communication. And for the most part, there's truth to that. But what about when it's your turn to speak? Can you structure your thoughts in a clear and concise way that other people can follow? For example, if you'd like a certain someone to do something for you, do you know the best way to ask them? Or if you were asked to give a talk about something that you understood well, would you be able to explain it properly? There's a lot of emphasis placed on actively listening to people, but converting your thoughts effectively into words or writing can be a million times harder. And the annoying thing is, it's not taught very well at schools, but we all end up having to communicate every day. Whether it's writing assignments at school, speaking in a professional manner at work, or simply selling products in our business, it benefits us all to know how to communicate well. And I was very average at communication growing up. I mean, my grades at school were great, but every time I met someone who spoke more eloquently than me, I secretly felt like I wanted to be like them, and I knew that other students wanted to be like them too. And I specifically remember one moment at the end of sixth form, which is basically like the 2 years between high school and university in the UK, where some teachers were grilling the medical school applicants with practice questions, of which I was one of them. And there was this one guy who was fairly new to the college, so I barely knew anything about him. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but the way he was able to communicate was so many levels above the rest of us that it still sticks with me today. And from that point onwards, I began to realize how much of a difference communication really makes. Now fast forward a few years and now I'm halfway through medical school, but my speaking and writing skills hadn't significantly improved. But all that was about to change. I had started 2 big projects at medical school which had opened my eyes to how much I needed to work on my communication. One was called Med Talk, and the other, Young Academics, is still running today. So I started reading books on how to grow a business, communicate with my target audience, write copy, and that sort of stuff. But funnily enough, it was making a new Instagram account that made me start appreciating that I needed to start writing better. In March 2019, whilst in Japan, I decided I wanted to start a personal brand and start blogging via my Instagram profile. And at first that meant writing longer, more meaningful captions than I usually would. I realized I was absolutely terrible at conveying my thoughts into writing. I wanted to say the most basic of things in these Instagram captions, but my grammar was poor, the sentence structure didn't flow, and it just made for very difficult reading. And I thought to myself, I got pretty good grades in English, I'm coming towards the end of medical school, but how comes I can't accurately turn my thoughts into the right words? Like surely something doesn't add up there. But within a couple of months of regular Instagram posts and making the captions, I felt like my writing was starting to improve. Because I was starting to say what I wanted to say in the way that I had imagined it. And then I started thinking to myself, this feels pretty sick. It's such a simple writing exercise, but it helps me think clearer about what I want to say, which helps my writing, which ultimately helps my reader understand me better. It's like everybody wins. But as you can imagine, Instagram captions only help me so much with my writing. So then I asked myself, how can I get better at writing outside of Instagram captions? I thought the answer would be to read more, to read different books, particularly those which talk about writing and effective communication. And so I read more and more, anything that could give me some secrets to better writing. But hearing how to do something does not necessarily make you better at it. For example, if someone taught you to swim and then you jumped into a pool for the first time, you wouldn't be able to just start swimming. And so eventually I started to hear the same message again and again through these books until it was all I could really hear. If you want to get better at writing, write. If you want to get better at thinking, write. Do everything else that you think may help, but just make sure you keep on writing. So now I'm thinking, okay, I can't just ignore all this advice. I have to find a way to start writing more. But how would I find the time to add another activity onto all the other activities I'm already spending my time on? This is where I reached a mental crossroad. All my life I would constantly jump from interest to interest and never see something through to the tipping point where you start to see exponential results. So I was trying to minimize the amount of things I was working on in order to focus on the most important stuff. But now, writing had to be one of them. Here's why. Number 1, clarity of thought. Being able to think clearly is a skill that I'll carry with me throughout my lifetime. Not only would it help me to understand information and process it better, but it also helped me to converse, teach, sell, tell stories, and much more. And if the practice of writing can help me with all of those things, I'm willing to heavily invest in that skill. Number 2, documenting. People are interested in consuming information. A lot of the time that information is in written format, which is something that I don't think will ever die, or at least during our lifetimes. If you're documenting things that you're interested in for the sake of yourself and for the benefit of others, I think that's a pretty generous thing to do. Number 3, journaling. Writing every week allows me to capture my thoughts in time and leaves a solidified trail of memories along the way. Without capturing those raw thoughts and emotions, they'd only be skewed by time, resulting in something that isn't true to the original. There's a saying I've heard amongst photographers that goes something like, you'll never regret taking too many photos, but you'll always regret taking too few. And I think the same applies to writing. Number 4, creativity. There are very few rules to writing, and even then they're not really rules, they're more like good practices. And once you realize that, you can start having fun with it. So if you work in a job that doesn't allow you to express any creativity, writing could be your creative outlet. Number 5, building an audience. Writing can help you find people who care about the same things you do, allowing you to build an audience of like-minded individuals. These people can become friends, business partners, or even help you to earn a living. And I could go on all day. The reality is that there's so many benefits to writing, and there are some which just can't be articulated well, they just have to be experienced. And so all of these reasons were floating in my head and ultimately helped me to say yes to writing. Now, writing every day was a bit too much for me to handle, and monthly was too little, so I settled for weekly. So in February 2020, I gave myself that weekly target to remain consistent. I wanted to write meaningful articles, but nothing that was too long. So my idea was to write bite-sized self-improvement articles. I plan to keep them super short so that more people might read to the end of them, and it would also be an exercise in cutting down unnecessary words. I also decided to do a sort of cross between a blog and a newsletter because I wanted my articles to be a bit more meaningful than a newsletter, but at the same time not as long as your traditional blog post. So I kind of mixed them together using a platform I had been researching at the time called Substack, which essentially allows you to email out your articles to a mailing list, but also it keeps an online version for people who don't follow that newsletter. And so with those big technicalities just out of the way, I started writing. At first, it took me close to 2 days to draft, redraft, and revise my first ever article. And it only ended up being something that you could read in like 2 minutes. Now it only takes me a few hours to write my first draft, maybe another hour to cut it down and take out the unnecessary bits. And finally, I would draw a custom illustration for the cover photo, which I think is a nice personal touch, even though sometimes they're pretty bad. Then I send it off. When I first started writing, I would always find the time to do it, but as time went on, I found it increasingly difficult to stay consistent. Sometimes I'd be working at the hospital over the weekend and be working long hours, so I'd have to write my newsletter late at night and sacrifice some sleep. Other times, I genuinely didn't think I'd have the energy in me or the willingness to get the words out, but I still managed to push through. I've even written articles from abroad and on car journeys in between places. And to be completely honest with you, I've loved every minute of it. It gives me something to look forward to each week, and it also makes me accountable for learning new things and reading and then eventually sharing it with all you great people who choose to read it each week. It's definitely helped me to improve my communication when I talk to my patients, my colleagues, with my business partners, or even when I'm trying to teach or market things to people. And it's also helped me with scripting these videos and allowing me to get across what I want to say in a more logical structure, which makes it much easier for you to follow along. And the messages I received from some of you guys have been something else. I'm not going to show any here. I don't feel like doing that just because a lot of you have shared very personal stories with me, and I find it a privilege that you've done that. But wow, I never realized that something I may have written may have been the right words at the right time for some of you. And so when I used to read books from authors that had had a big impact on me, I never would have thought that maybe one day my writing may have some sort of impact on those who read my work. I've been writing for just over a year now. 55 weeks in fact, and there hasn't been a single week since I started that I didn't send something out on my newsletter. And that is how and why I keep writing every single week. If you've made it this far, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell and all that good stuff, because it really does help my channel to grow. I've also written several articles in the past sort of around the topic of writing, so check out my newsletter Life Lemons if you'd like to check out those, and subscribe if you'd like to get the new ones in your inbox. Finally, if you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy my previous video on how I stay productive and focused, and maybe even this playlist of my other self-improvement videos. Otherwise, do what matters, and I'll see you next week.